Once I landed on this framework for thinking about plating dishes, the aesthetics of food, I personally couldn't unsee it. And it really helps me think through not just how I want my food to be presented, but it also ends up being an incredible framework for teaching people, communicating to my team how I want dishes to look, and make sure you catch this part at the end where we take 10 chefs' signature dishes and categorize them using this framework because I want to prove to you that it works. What's up, folks? My name is Justin Khan. I hope this insight ends up being a valuable part of your repertoire. If you want to make sure you get the next video with tips just like this one, give this video a like and make sure you subscribe to the Repertoire channel. All right, let's get into it. Let's talk about all 4 kinds of layouts that I've landed on. I'll give some examples of each one. And to me, 97, maybe even 98% of dishes are plated in one of these 4 layouts. We have linear, we have condensed, we have isolated, and we have stacked. Remember those 4 names, let's break each one down, and we can start with linear. This is the plating that took the world by storm when it became popular. This might be right down the middle of the plate. Some folks prefer the aesthetic where it's slightly off center, but it's identified by both the shape as well as negative space on the plate. If you see a linear plate up, you know there was time put into this plate up. You can't rush through this. Every single component was placed with intention, and because of that, the linear plate up is a bit of a flex. Yes, even plate ups where components end up following the rim of the plate, those also fall into this layout. A curved line is still a line. Another reason this rose in popularity is the ability to intersperse components on a dish that regardless of the spoonful or the forkful that a guest takes, they end up with a reasonably decent mix of flavors and textures on their bite. But it's all about this idea of if your 5-component dish is fried sunchoke, black olive puree, mustard greens, curly celery shaves, pickled mustard seeds, if you're plating up 6 plates, you gotta really decide, okay, black olive puree is first on all 6 plates. Then we do fried sunchoke on all 6 plates. Then we do celery shaves on all the plates, spoon mustard seeds on each one, and then we garnish with mustard leaves. I break this down even further in the reps for plating video. That's linked in the description right below the like button, and that's on the Justin Khanna channel. Next up, let's talk about stacked layouts. This is when a lot of folks think of the 90s style plating, the tiered presentations of food that layer on top of one another, and even more casual concepts follow this framework, believe it or not. The example that I'd like to give folks is a burger is a perfect example of a stacked plate up. This often relies again on our order of operations because you don't want to start your burger by putting the patty down below the bottom bun, right? This ends up being a great way to show off precision. You can play off the circular shape that often gets formed by stacking components, and a lot of folks use ring molds to achieve even more precise results. Even the Rubik's Cube plate up that got popular a couple years back, that's also a stacked plate up. It's just fun to plate food like this. You can hide flavors and components in between the layers that guests might not be expecting. It's really consistent looking. If you're plating a ton of plates for a larger dinner, this is really popular. The only thing you gotta look out for is making sure guests know how to eat this dish, because I've seen it in the past. Guests start with component on the top, eat it. Then they eat the next component, then they eat the next component. If your intention is to have all of the components be enjoyed together, make sure you give that instruction. Swinging the other way, the isolated layout rose in popularity when I would say like the modernist cuisine movement happened. Heavy use of negative space, clear separation of components, that's what signifies isolated layouts. And this often ends up being super popular in longer tasting menus. Why? Because isolated plate ups can be used to convey generosity, clearly showing a myriad of different components, especially if a lot of work went to each one individually. You can show all of that off in one presentation where it's just like, wow, look at all of this. Believe it or not, it can also be used to flex simplicity. This is a perfectly cooked piece of fish, and then just like a little quenelle of this yuzu condiment, that's the only thing on the plate. That's really hard because you can't hide behind a bunch of other components. This is also where a lot of those memes of tasting menus and comment section of like my TPC videos come out, where everybody's like, oh, there's only like a little tiny bite of food on the plate. With isolated plate ups, the focus is on whatever you want to showcase, and that's it. Last up, we have condensed plate ups. A huge amount of food is plated in this way, mostly for practical reasons. A restaurant that I personally worked at had no heat lamps, and so we would use condensed plate ups to make sure that our components would retain their heat better. They would all kind of stay condensed in the center of the plate or the bowl versus something like an isolated plate up where the elements get cold faster because they're separated. Condensed plate ups also tend to be faster to plate up, ultimately relying on something like a garnish at the end to make things feel polished and put together, but 80% of the plate up is just like scoop of potatoes, sliced beef, asparagus next to that, and then you'll garnish with like watercress leaves or something like that, or chives. Not to say that you can't have a beautiful or elevated condensed plate up, it just typically doesn't tend to follow that stacked structure, and the components can typically be interchanged in the order of operations. All right, as promised, let's take 10 dishes dishes from chefs and restaurants all across the world and categorize these. I'm gonna put the dish on screen. I'm gonna pause for a second on each one so you can decide on your answer, and if you disagree with any of my assessments, you can leave your thoughts in the comments. All right, let's start with oysters and pearls. This is the classic Thomas Keller dish. It's served at both the French Laundry as well as Per Se. This is... Yes, this is a stacked plate up. You've got your tapioca on the bottom, the chive butter sauce on top of that, and then you do poached oysters and then a quenelle of caviar on the side. If you don't know this dish, I understand why you might have missed this one. It kind of looks condensed because you have the oysters and the caviar, but if you didn't stack this dish in this way, that's why this is the answer, because it would be a completely different dish if you put the oysters on the bottom. All right, dish number 2. This is satio tempestas in one specific plate up, a famous vegetable salad from Fransen, the 3 Michelin-starred restaurant in Stockholm. This is kind of a spin on the gargouillou salad from Michel Bras, if you're not familiar. This is, yes, a condensed plate up, at least in this version. They have different plate ups where this was linear in the past, and they have other versions where this was isolated. But for this picture that I have on screen, all components are meticulously plated and counted so that you get a mix of something like 40 vegetables. I plated this dish when I staged there, but this is a condensed plate up. Dish number 3, let's do another vegetable dish. This is from NOMA's vegetable season. Wait for it. It is isolated. Yes, this has clear separation of components, regardless of if you did the mushroom first or the pine shoot first. It's the same dish that signifies the isolated plate up. All right, next up, this fish dish from Single Thread, the 3 Michelin-starred restaurant in Sonoma, California. Any guesses? Stacked. Yes, this is clearly one component on top of the other, on top of the other, on top of the other. All right, dish number 5, let's do the famous plated on the table dessert at ALINEA. This one is... isolated. Yes, this takes up literally an entire dining room table, so having individual sauce swooshes and crumble piles and chocolate pieces and fruit garnishes is what makes this dessert such a signature move. I know I'm trying to illustrate examples here, but hopefully you'll also see one of my favorite parts about these creative frameworks is that, yes, you can combine them. If you see in the center, there's definitely some sort of stacked setup happening in this photo, so before you go in the comments, yes, you can combine these layouts for even better aesthetic types. Dish number 6, let's do this one, a restaurant I just had the pleasure of eating at, video coming soon, but this is a chocolate dessert from Central in Peru. Yes, this is linear. This is also a perfect example of slightly curving the line, where it's not quite straight, but it still follows the principles of that linear layout. All right, last 3. These are going to be rapid fire. I put them up on screen right now. Take a look at them. These are just from a random Google search of the art of plating, and I would say the caviar one is stacked. The green puree dish is condensed, even though the herbs and the swoosh of the puree kind of follows a linear pattern, and the dessert is definitely a linear layout. So what's my point with all of this? Well, so often when you're creating a new dish, you have a vision for how you want it presented. I've certainly fallen victim to thinking that one layout was going to be what I wanted, only to plate it up and be frustrated with either how it looks or how it eats. That's one of the reasons I draw some of my dishes before they end up getting presented. My ultimate goal with this is language. You're able to have greater speed in deciding what plating layout you want for your dish, and then adjust and tweak from there until you nail down exactly what you want. Instead of this long, drawn-out explanation, if you're a sous chef, for example, you can tell your chef de partie, let's try out this new trout dish as a stacked plate up and we can go from there, right? If you and your station partner are working on a dessert before you present it to your chef de cuisine, you can say, I think we should try it as a linear plate up that kind of hugs the side of the plate, and then you can plate that up and show that version to your chef and see what they say. Last up, and this is just a quick observation that I'll leave you with, I'll only speak for myself here, but I started out cooking, and I was definitely cooking food that was plated condensed and stacked. I started off in casual restaurants, and then a lot of the food in my culinary school was the same. We weren't really doing anything fancy. Then I went into Michelin kitchens, and I was obsessed with linear plating and isolated plate ups, and as I've been getting older, I'm kind of going to that other side of the bell curve. I'm not 20 years old anymore. I really gravitate towards plating things condensed and stacked again. And what I'm finding is I'm not alone in this. Ever since I started writing about this concept and formulating this framework, I noticed that some of the best chefs in the world end up plating their dishes either stacked or condensed. And I think the reason behind, if I had to kind of extrapolate, is they value how the guest enjoys it over how fancy it looks. I could certainly go on, but that's another video. I did mention at the top of this video that there was 97% of dishes that fall into this framework. Of course there's going to be outliers. A great example is like the green apple balloon from ALINEA. Is that a stacked plate up? I guess it could kind of be. There are a bunch of dishes that might not fall into these frameworks. If you find dishes like that, please let me know in the comments and maybe I can come up with the 5th layout in this framework. But regardless, I really hope you've enjoyed this breakdown. If you haven't checked it out already, I have an entire plating exercise. It's called Reps for Plating on my own personal YouTube channel. If you want a customizable exercise that you can practice with really cheap ingredients, if you're interested in improving your plating skills, it's absolutely free. You can also check out my other tip on how to get more ergonomic and effective plating setups on your pass. That's also linked right here. Also in the description. My name is Justin Khanna with Repertoire. Thanks for watching.